All right, let's continue on here. In our agenda, we've looked at citizens, federalism, biblical form of government, et cetera, et cetera. Today, I want to talk about the rule of law. The rule of law. And if we get done, law and order. You guys are guinea pigs and heathens. What kind of corrupt person would instantly think of that? I'm assuming that. What was I going to say? Oh, you guys are guinea pigs. Not having these quizzes every day in class is allowing us to cover material faster. So we've got 2 or 3 days, I'm guessing, free, where I can come up with something new for you.
You could study for the next test.
No, anyway, but I'm thinking about it. We're going to have some time. Field trip day. That would be fun. We don't have to take the girls. I know. We'll let the girls go to Bly's and shoot the .22 pistols, and us guys will go to Midwest Gun Exchange and rent one of their fully automatic rifles. Or you could do the M16 or get one of the tripod-mounted 50 caliber machine guns. It just gets significantly more expensive when you're shooting 700 rounds a minute. But it'll be lots of fun. So, a lot more expensive. So, plus about $250 just to. Oh, that's right. Pastor David's paying. So, I think we all need our own machine gun. We don't need to share. That right there is the problem with Obamacare. The government's paying, and all of a sudden we need more. And that's when you're not paying, your desires and changes want drastically. So, all right, rule of law. We're going to go back to this. We're going to have the rule of man in this classroom so we can talk about the rule of law. All right, introduction, definition, however you want to label it here. Very broad, when we're talking about government, there's 2 options to the way the government can operate. One is where there is a ruler who runs things. He makes the decisions. Jacob does something wrong, and he stands before the king. How many go for execution? Okay. Sorry, Jacob. But it won't be rude for long. So. And the king arbitrarily makes a decision. All right. So the ruler, whatever title, whatever, he's in charge. He makes the decisions, or it could be a group of people or some people. That's referred to as the rule of man, which is not what our country was founded on. Madison made this statement. He's talking about the Massachusetts Constitution, but it applies. It said, to the end that it may be a government of laws and not of men. All right, he and the idea of the founding was that the government should be run by law. So the one option there is rule by man, where there's a man or a group of people who are making the decisions. They're not obligated to follow any predetermined patterns or rules or laws or constitutions. They just do what they want. Think of an absolute monarch, but it could take other forms. All right, the other option is the rule of law. And in that situation, there are some laws that determine what happens. Right? When Jacob gets hauled before the government, if they determine that he's guilty, following the law and rules that have been established to determine guilt, then he would be punished based upon what that law said. The king couldn't, take a raise of hands in a courtroom to see do we execute him or not. They would look at the law, and often there's some range of punishment, and he would get punished according to what the law said. Right, so in those cases, the law is ruling as opposed to men ruling. The rule of law as opposed to the rule of man. Does that make sense? We have in our country, or had in our country at least, the rule of law, where the Constitution and laws of Congress and other places determined what happened. All right, we are under Obama, and we could go back further than that, but definitely under Obama, we saw that the rule of law being thrown out the window in lots of cases. Him personally deciding to change immigration law, Anybody hear some discussion of that? I mean, it wasn't what the law said. He's changing it. Right? That's the rule of man. All of the dozens and dozens of times he changed Obamacare, the law said one thing, and he said, oh, I don't like that. And he just changes it. Right? That's the rule of man, where the king, the ruler, just arbitrarily does what he wants. The rule of law is where the law determines it. And Republicans are weenies. But a little bit they fought. I heard a great endorsement of Ted Cruz this morning by Senator Dan Coates, Indiana senator. And he was describing how much Ted Cruz doesn't get along with the other senators. And he was endorsing Marco Rubio, but in my mind I thought, wow, Ted Cruz should play that as his commercial. Ted Cruz doesn't get along with all of us who are willing to live with Obamacare. And that's a pretty good endorsement. The next caller in this morning, that was his very point. Ted Cruz should record that and make it a video, make it a commercial. What was my point here? That's a great question. The senators, you have no idea if my point is the senators in Congress. They didn't fight it. I was trying to make some point about. They didn't fight it like they should have, but there was a little bit of glimmer of hope here or there where they would come out and say, wait a second, the law says this, you can't do that, and they never followed through on it, all right? One that I think is still being litigated in the courts is that the exchanges, the websites that were set up for people to buy insurance through, the law says in black and white, the wording in the law says that the subsidies from the government have to go through the state exchanges. The state of Indiana would set up an exchange, and you could buy your insurance there and get a subsidy that way. But a whole bunch of states didn't set up exchanges, so Obama set up ones himself and started giving subsidies through that, which is the law very clearly says it has to be the state exchanges. Okay? And Republicans, rather than fight it in Congress and other places, they've allowed this case to go to the Supreme Court, and who knows what they'll say on it. But there's just the rule of man. It wasn't going the way he wanted, so he does what he wants. All right, so that's a dangerous path to go down. All right, let me give you a little more formal definition of the rule of law, and then we'll look at some characteristics or some things that are typically included in a nation that is governed by the rule of law. All right, a little bit more rigid definition or something longer that I can ask you on a test. What is the rule of law? It's a situation where the laws rule. It doesn't help us a whole lot. The rule of law is the idea that government authority may only be exercised in accordance with written laws. There's an extra phrase to add in there, but government authority may only be exercised in accordance with written laws. So the subsidies to help people buy insurance are only supposed to go through the state exchanges. And if Obama was abiding by the rule of law, he said, I'm sorry, your state didn't set up an exchange. And that was the intent of that part of the law, to try to force all the states to buy into this thing because the citizens of their state couldn't get these subsidies unless they bought into it. The last phrases are which were adopted through an established procedure. Some system where the people are participating and they're choosing legislatures. And that first phrase, or you shouldn't get out of this idea that the king, as long as he writes down what he arbitrarily decides to be the law and then acts by that, that's not the rule of law. The point is there's some legislature or some constitution that's formed through some established procedure, and that written law determines how government authority is exercised from whatever level it comes from. All right, so definition. Now let me give you a list here of things that are typically included. All right, now this is, if we talk about a country living under the rule of law, we have that basic idea. Government authority exercised according to written laws. These are here more kind of specific things that are included. The first one is a little bit of a repeat, but that's all right. First one, government decisions are based upon written laws and rules. You get stopped for speeding. the government there makes a decision based upon written laws and rules. I just heard in Chicago, the crime rate spiked in January, and they're saying, we don't know what happened. And then as if it was unrelated, they said, the police have been stopping fewer and fewer people because the city went from, they said, a little postcard type thing to fill out every time you stop somebody just to report what happened, to a 2-page document to fill out what happened, to describe what happened. And they said the police just don't feel like messing with it. So it's like there's two unrelated things here. We don't know why there's so many shootings. Well, maybe it's because you've backed the police into such a corner that they don't want to actually respond to stuff. But there may be excessive written things at that point. But government decisions based upon written laws and rules. All right, the second thing. Punishment for an action cannot be decided after the fact. You get caught robbing the bank in town, you get punished based upon what we decided beforehand in the law would be the punishment for that thing. Punishments for an action cannot be decided after the fact. What is a phrase that goes along with the idea of deciding the punishment after the fact? Applies other places, but also there. It's like you're going the right direction. They're not allowed in America under the Constitution. That's true too. It's not the answer to the question. Ex post facto laws, after the fact, all right, they're not allowed. But that would apply to other things, but as well as changing the punishment after you do it also fits there. All right, another characteristic here of a situation where there's rule of law is rules are applied evenly to all. For the sake of rule of law as well as other things, Hillary Clinton should be indicted. I will not be surprised if nothing comes of it. But she should be. I've even just in the last couple of days, she's been making comments like this. I never sent an email marked classified. And if you think about how closely she's parsing words there, she would have the classified labeling taken off of it. She would send classified information, but it wasn't marked classified. And that sounds like what some of you would tell Mr. Armacost. I never, very, very closely. So anyway, even after the FBI and others have said there's more higher than top secret information, she's still saying, I never sent emails marked classified. She needs to be in jail. All right, should be applied evenly to all. In a situation where there's rule of law, applied evenly to all. All right, fourth thing, due process. That is not how Mountain Dew is made. It's not the due process. Sorry, DUE process. Just an established procedure for how things are handled. You get arrested, you have a hearing, you have a grand jury, you have a trial, etc. A due process, some established procedure. Here, mostly we're thinking about a criminal prosecution due process for that. We talked about that last semester. Due process technically is, in reality, is just the process. Whatever the established process is, it has to be followed. Does anybody remember what liberals have thrown into this thing?
I forget the exact name, but I know it was where they say certain things have to be required in the due process.
Yes, whatever the process is, it's got to include these pieces. And if it doesn't include those pieces, then it's not really due process. That is not really the thought here. Just whatever the process is. Substantive versus, and the other term is leaving my mind, procedural due process. Substantive is what you described, where there's some substance required. I think it'd be great to have a state that set up a empowered youth type spin wheel. You get convicted of a crime and you get to spin the wheel to see what happens. It could be a game show. We could have different can have the stocks and the cell that they're going to be in for 20 years, right? You can have kind of all those things right there on the stage. And and as long as that was a process that was determined beforehand, that would be due process. I really don't think that would be the best process, but it would be.
You have different levels.
Instead of taxes, we could do some sort of game show like that and fund the money off the revenues. All right, due process. All right, a fifth thing, a presumption of innocence. You're assumed to be innocent. The government has to prove that you're guilty as opposed to the other way around. Presumption of innocence. It really does put the burden on the government. The government can come to Sarah and say, we think you've been hacking into financial institutions around the country and transferring money to your personal checking account and living hound the hog. I mean, she does have a Columbia coat on. And that's probably a Coach purse. Yeah, see there, she's already lying. All right, the government can make all these accusations against you, and you can just sit there and say nothing. If they can't prove it, then you're innocent. They've got to prove it. You don't have to point out how you're innocent. They've got to prove that you're guilty. So it does put the burden on them. If you lived in this area when Blagojevich was being prosecuted, that was his final defense. He said, I don't need to say anything. You guys never proved that I was guilty. Right? He was determined to be guilty by the jury, but that was his defense. You guys didn't prove it. I don't have to say a word. They didn't prove that I did what they said. So presumption of innocence, that really is an important thing, that you're presumed innocent. We talked about the tax code and how there's not a presumption of innocence. Is it the music? There's not a presumption of innocence there. So, all right, next thing, habeas corpus. Habeaus, corpus. Corpus. What in the world is that? Is that some disease? Been infected with a severe case of habeas corpus? Probably should get out of class for that too. Jacob?
You can't be held without being convicted.
You can't be not being convicted. You can't be held without the government substantiating why you're being held. They can't just arrest you and throw you in jail.
That's right.
No. I mean, they can hold you until the trial. It mostly applies to the time period before.
That you did.
What's that?
They have evidence that you did.
Yeah, they've got to somehow prove that you did. Habeas corpus means to produce the body. All right. So the police arrest you. Your lawyer could issue whatever's called a writ of habeas corpus or something like that. And the government's got to produce you and say, this is why we're holding him. They can't just whisk you off to jail. How many have read one of the greatest books ever in all of history? We have the Bible. Below that, The Count of Monte Cristo. Okay? The guy gets drug off to jail. This writ of habeas corpus is not there. He never even gets told what he's being accused of, right? So to prevent that type of thing, he was never convicted, never had a trial, just gets thrown in jail. So writ of habeas corpus, or just habeas corpus is fine. All right, and the last one here, and I'm sure this is not an exhaustive list, but it gives you the types of things, and when we talk about rule of law, that just kind of generic definition, the types of things that in practice, as we apply that, work themselves out. All right, the last one on my list is courts provide reasons based upon written law for their decisions. Courts provide reasons based on written law for their decisions. Christina is found guilty of conspiring with Sarah. They were together in this thing. And there's a trial. She fails to defend herself properly, and she's found guilty. And then there's a punishment handed down. There would be a reason based upon the law. She was found guilty of this particular part of the law, and here's the punishment, this time frame, so we're giving her this punishment. The courts would have to base their decision on the law and state where. All right, so that courts provide reasons based on written law for their decisions. There's a habit that's a little bit dangerous that we have for if I understand it mostly, right, kind of routine decisions where the courts will just say, this is our ruling, and not bother pointing out where it is in the law. Just, you get 6 months in jail, come and see us then. And not grounded in the law. And it's usually used mostly for kind of obvious things where there's not a real question. But it's a little bit of a dangerous precedent, all right, for the courts not to point to the law and say where they base their decision on. So, but anyway, courts providing written evidence or written rules based upon the law. Provide reasons based on written law for their decisions. I didn't say that well. Okay, rule of law. Definition, basic understanding. Mary's at least smiling all of a sudden. Are we done? No, we're not done. We got some more things to talk about. I have all that as the definition, basic explanation, however you want to label that. The next thing I have is, what about the Bible? What does the Bible say about the rule of law? Does it support this idea that men should be governed by law as opposed to men? Or does it kind of go contrary to this idea? What does the Bible say? What does God's written law for us say? Or just the fact that God gave us a Bible that's written down points us in this direction. When he went to describe how the Jews were supposed to operate, their system of government, it's written down. The Ten Commandments are written down. The New Testament is written down. All right, so I don't have a whole list of verses here, but we have a Bible that's written down. All right, this you can, in a sense, think of salvation and access to heaven being determined by written law. God is not in heaven arbitrarily deciding on each person. You shouldn't sit here. Arbitrarily deciding, do we let her into heaven? Because, but I repented and accepted Christ. He says, well, I don't know. Let's think about this. No, he says, if you come to him for salvation, you're going to be accepted. It's in a sense there, the written law is the determining what happens. Now we're talking about God who's absolutely sovereign, but he has promised that. So anyway, written law, I think it's not too hard to see that the Bible supports that idea. And if you ever doubt it, just pick one up and read it. It's written. It's written for us. So that's what I have for the Bible. It supports that. Everything from the fact that we have a Bible to the Old Testament law code, the Ten Commandments, how God promises if we come to him for salvation, he's going to accept us. There's not going to be a second trial in heaven where he might, say, I don't like your clothes. I'll quit picking on Joy. Plaid and solid. Come on. Two types of plaid, right? Isn't the scarf?
No, it's hearts.
Oh, it's even worse. Hearts than plaid and solid? Come on. God's not going to be making some arbitrary decision. He's going to look to see if we accepted Christ as our Savior and let us into heaven. So even salvation in that sense is the rule of law, not the rule of man. So the Bible supports this idea. All right, the last thing for this section on the rule of law, before we get to law and order, and the two are very, very closely intertwined, is the importance of the rule of law. Why is it important for a country to have the rule of law? We're right on the edge of our seats now. This is going to be a great video because I'm sure that sounds like getting picked up by this. All right, importance of the rule of law. I have a list here of, I've got dashes, 5 things of why this is important. All right, first thing, the rule of law, it creates a situation where all people in society are bound to follow the law. Everybody's obligated to follow the law. The leaders are, and that's where if Hillary is not indicted, it will do damage to just the philosophical structure of our country. That here she's violating the rules of handling this top secret information. She should be prosecuted. Just the rule of law. Everybody is obligated to follow. So leaders are. Wow, I just talked about Hillary Clinton as my leader. Your leaders should. Leaders should. We should. All right. Everybody in society is obligated to follow the law. The police should. I mean, just all the way along. Anybody ever driven? I've never done it, but I've heard of driven in a place like Mexico or some crazy place like that.
I've ridden in a van.
What's that?
Driven in Mexico.
Okay, what was it like?
It was fun.
Fun. You're very warped. Please describe the fun that you had.
Well, we sat in the very, very back seat. It was like a 12-passenger van, and the seat wasn't bolted down. So they don't have stop signs or anything. They have speed bumps to keep everything normal. So the guy that was driving would go really soft over the first
And then
one,
hammer.
speed up and go over the back one. We were on the back wheel, so we'd fly up. And he'd fly up and forward, and the seat wasn't bolted down. So it was fun.
I wasn't so much thinking about the seats.
Well, it was crazy too because they don't have like rules or anything, and people just go and do it.
People drive all over the place,
Yeah.
wherever they want. There's no rule of law. Just think of the chaos that creates. Right? We get on the highway here and go in town, and the light turns green. You're probably thinking, you just go through. I don't usually creep out and look both directions to make sure people are really stopping. We assume, yeah, everybody's going to stop. They've got a red light, and we go through. Until someone runs, yeah, but that happens occasionally. But the rule of law creates that orderly society, where everybody's following the rules. We expect the highways, I think, is a good place to see that. We're following the rules. We just assume everyone else is going to abide by the rules. And when somebody doesn't, when someone runs the traffic like that, is something that gets their attention because it's out of the ordinary. So, all right. So it creates a society where everybody's bound to follow the law. All right, and I got ahead of myself a little bit. The second one, it provides an orderly society where people can prosper. An orderly society. You can think about the traffic system as an example. But everybody knows where the boundaries are. I just heard an example of the NFL when they added the 2-point conversion. Anybody know the rules? Has that been a long time ago? Yeah. Okay. Somebody's making reference. I forget exactly the point. But everybody knew going into it that the rule was changing for the next season. They knew how things were going to operate. They could then function that way. It wasn't from game to game the ref, depending on his mood, would allow or not allow it, or maybe after one team scores they have the option, but the other team doesn't. It was the same thing all the way along. The rules changed a little bit, but everybody knew what they were and allowed people to then compete and to prosper. Excuse me. Imagine, I just claim this is not this, but imagine that this class was governed by the rule of law. This is just an absolute dictatorship, so it doesn't apply. But imagine if this was a rule of, imagine what it would be like if we didn't have the rule of law, okay? I have given you a written document that describes when certain things are due and certain quizzes you have to take and that type of thing. Imagine if I just arbitrarily went into ThinkWave and shifted dates around, and sometimes I gave you 2 weeks extra, sometimes I took it away from you 2 weeks early. I never told you about it. I said, you shouldn't be lazy. You should be working ahead and take it off a week ahead of time. Think of how hard it would be for you to succeed if you never knew what the rules were going to be. Come in for the test on, when is it? The 19th? Long ways away. And, we review, and I tell you what's going to be on the test, and I come in that day, and I was tired of government notes, so I bring in my pre-cal final, which should be fun, right? You're a math major, right? No, it's your sister. You should be a math major to make it easy. Any math majors here? So that would be fun. You could just sit there and watch that thing. You wouldn't even know how to start thinking, so you wouldn't have to struggle. It would just, wow.
Would we be allowed to bring in lighters to burn the test?
Well, we'd have to decide at that point. If we're not going to have the rule of law, it would be just an arbitrary decision at that point. So, but the point is, it would make it very hard for you to succeed if there wasn't some semblance of the rule of law in here where, I said the quizzes are due at this point, we're going to have a test at this point over this material, and you knew what to expect. That way, if you fail, it's your fault. If you don't study for the test, it's your fault. If I bring in a pre-cal test, it'd be hard for me to really blame you for not preparing for it when I told you to study one thing and I bring something else. So imagine a businessman who never knows what the rules are going to be that he's forced to operate under. Maybe he invests a lot of money and sets up a system to call people over the phone. Do you work there? No, you don't. Does anybody work at AmeriCall in here? Joseph here, he fits there. He likes to talk.
They don't call people anymore.
They're calling them for their particular program. But they invest all this money, and all of a sudden the government says, you know what? We're not going to let you do that anymore. Wait a second, I just spent all this money. And then he sells all the equipment, and the government changes his mind. We'll let you do it again. Think of the quandary there. Or this has happened with the insurance in Obamacare. And the law is saying one thing, and businesses bracing for that, very painful consequences and expensive consequences. And then as they're bracing for that, the president says, we're going to change this part. And it leaves these businessmen in a quandary. Do I hire more people and take on this extra possible expense, only to have the government change it on me, and never knowing what's going to happen, what the expenses are going to be? To a certain extent, to a certain point, businessmen can live with lots of things, but they need to have it be established. I mean, they don't want to hire somebody this year and next year realize it's going to cost them an extra $25,000 that they weren't planning on. All right, they've got to know. All right, so if we think of someplace outside this class, somebody trying to succeed in life, it makes it difficult. Or if, I'm sure you guys are doing this very fervently, investing into a Roth IRA so that you have money at retirement. Okay. It really is a good deal if you have an extra dollar or two. The way that thing works is you pay taxes on the money now, and when you retire and take it out, it's tax-free. Really good deal. What if when I retire, I've got some money there, what if when I retire the government changes the rules on me? Says, you know what? You shouldn't have all that money tax-free. We're going to tax it. Wait a second, you can invest money into a regular IRA and don't pay taxes on it now and agree to pay taxes later. That's an option. But I pay taxes on it now. And if they're just going to be changing the rules arbitrarily, then I don't know how to plan, don't know how to operate. All right, so the point is, it creates a system, an orderly society where people can prosper, right? All right, enough examples. It provides a method of supplying justice. A method of supplying justice. We don't have to go vigilante. All right. Some punk kids busted the window in our car. This is when the O's were dating. So a couple years ago. We took them up to the beach, parked, if you're familiar, if you go to Porter Beach, down over the hill, there's a parking lot at the bottom. Parked down there, and we were sitting and letting them walk up and down the beach. Get back to the car, the window's busted. I didn't have to take fingerprints and then go through town looking for those kids and stringing them up. We called the police, and unfortunately they didn't string them up. But there was a system in place for justice to be done. I didn't have to do it myself. The police did it. The kids went to McDonald's and bought money on our credit card, or bought food on our credit cards. The kids knew them and told the police, "Oh yeah, they were here," and they pulled up their credit cards, and it was ours that they used. But the parents refused to cooperate with anything, so nothing happened.
Wow.
Yeah, it's kind of aggravating. We did a couple years later go back to the police and ask if we can at least get the purse back. They kept it for evidence. And it was about 2 years later we got the purse back. So, maybe I'm not supporting my position here. A method of supplying justice. But I didn't have to go hunt them down. We have a police force that does that. I mean, if there's a crime that's committed, our thought is, well, let's call the police. Let's get them involved. It's not, let's get my buddies together and we're going to go find these guys. All right, the Old West, we hear stories about the vigilantes enforcing that. We have a system that does that. So it provides a system of supplying justice, both for the victim. I mean, I can have, at least in theory, justice for that, and also for the accused. Right? Talked about Sarah being accused of, what would you call that? Electronic theft from financial institutions, whatever. I'm sure it's a big fancy word. If she's innocent, there's a mechanism in place for her to demonstrate her innocence. There's a trial and a jury that, right? So there's a system for supplying justice on both ends of the thing like that. She doesn't have to go and kill all of her accusers. And there's a system in place. All right, so that's a method of supplying justice. All right, fourth thing, it provides a system where everybody is treated the same before the law. The same before the law. Guys and girls, well, guys are always the bad guy. See there? That's another reason why women shouldn't vote. They're prejudiced against us. Right. Same before the law. The mayor, I have here in my notes the president. Maybe this is the exception to the rule here. But everybody the same is the intent there. Much more so if you're thinking, wow, the rule of law is not working very good. Much more so we have this than if we just had the rulers arbitrarily making decisions. All right, there are still written laws and rules that enforce things, and there are people that are pushing even the Hillary thing that there should be some sort of prosecution because she has violated the law. So anyway, treated the same before the law. And then the last one, no society can have freedom and liberty without the rule of law, without some written, established law that is followed generally by everybody. There can't be freedom and liberty. Always, to me, a good place to illustrate this with, for lots of things, is to think of some sporting event. And if we have a sporting event where there's not the rule of law, right? The high school guys just went to Rockford and got first place there. Imagine if the refs just, at whims throughout the different matches changed the rules and went to, and Jacob might help me, went to Greco-Roman style as opposed to folk style. Right? Greco-Roman style, you get points for different things than you do in folk styles. Two different styles of wrestling. And then maybe some guy throws in some cage match rules. If you pick the guy and throw him into the chairs, you get extra points. And it just went, you never knew what rules at what point, right? And then maybe the players themselves, one guy's boxing, and if there's not some established rule that everybody's following, it's hard for anybody to succeed. It's hard for there to be any freedom, any liberty like that. So in a society, it's not possible to have freedom and liberty without some rule of law, some established things there. All right, rule of law. Questions on that? Very, very important concept underpinning a lot of the philosophical nature of our government. The rule of law. And if you listen, I haven't heard it a whole lot recently, but back during the Obamacare, the first couple of years of that, this idea of the rule of law kept coming up. So wait a second, the law says this and he's doing that. Or Obama's infamous statement of, I have a phone and I have a pen and I can do what I want. He's there directly saying, I don't care what the law says, I can do what I want. He's throwing out the rule of law. That should be a chilling thing really to everybody. So wait a second. That's an important facet of our structure to have this rule of law. Even if you happen to like the things he was doing, that should be a chilling thought, because the next guy that has a phone and a pen, he might not like you. And he could do stuff to you, so it really undermines the whole system. And we have had damage done to that. So, all right, questions on the rule of law? All right, let's at least introduce the next thought, and maybe I'll point you in the direction we're going to go with this, and we'll stop for the day. The next thought is law and order. And for the non-carnal members of the class, a society of law and order is a situation where people obey the laws. Really, it's the result of the rule of law. If you have the rule of law, and by that I mean all through society, the leaders following the law, the police, the local governments, the citizens. We have the rule of law permeating society. It creates a system of law and order. It's really the result of the rule of law. I can have it. It's the condition that the rule of law creates, law and order. You might have, some of you guys, been involved in a basketball game where there wasn't a whole lot of law and order. All right. Just go on a Thursday night or Sunday night. There's no rule of law. And it's, I haven't played in a long time. Is it still, I'm looking at you guys, still a little bit wild? It used to be basically, unless there were bones protruding from the skin, there were no fouls. And it's just, want to play? But anyway, it's the situation that's created when there's the rule of law. On all levels of society, it produces a system of law and order where everybody is obeying the laws. You are obeying the laws, the leaders are obeying the laws, the courts, the police. We're all obeying the laws. It creates a system of law and order. Think of, a basketball game or a wrestling meet or a football game or like a knitting championship or something that a few girls are involved in. Everybody's following the same rules, right? All they're frantically knitting. So, law and order. That's law and order. The only reason I have this section is to bring up this question. And I want us to think about this a little bit from the Bible, is at what point should a Christian not obey the government? And we're just talking about how important this rule of law is and law and order and how everybody is obligated to obey. And, we're all following the same rules. At what point does a Christian, though, say, the rule of law is important, but I'm going to disobey? I'm not looking for an answer right now, so we will talk about it. All right, so when is a Christian not obligated to obey the government? This is the way I've got it stated. Or maybe I've got an alternate version. What should a Christian be willing to go to jail for? When you disobey the government, that's definitely a risk you're taking, going to jail. So, and I want us to think about it and look at some examples in the Bible where people disobeyed the government. And see if we can come up with some things that govern this about if we're ever put in that position. When would it be right to say, I'm not going to obey the government? So we will talk about that next time. And that's just questions. Going once. Nice. I'm learned at this point there's never questions, so you're dismissed.